Playing video games saved me from entering a life that wasn't for me. So, growing up, I unfortunately never got to live in the best of neighborhoods. And unfortunately, that meant that whenever I went to school, I would have to come straight home, or I would have to attend an after school program, or I would have to go to a park where I would meet up with my friends. But I was never allowed to interact with anybody outside of that circle. And I get that as a kid, that's pretty common, it's pretty normal. But it's more strict when you grow up in a very, very horrible condition of living. And it sucks even more when you begin to realize what I could have been had I not been more indoors than I was outdoors. I would still spend time outdoors as a kid, but a lot of it was mainly spent indoors because unfortunately there wasn't really many people that wanted to socialize with me. I know currently I don't have any friends. I don't have anybody. It's just my family and whatnot, which I'm thankful for. But growing up, there wasn't really much people who wanted to talk to me. Only every now and then when they never had anyone else to play with, it would just be me. Hanging out with I'd basically be a second option at best when I was a kid. Now that I think about it, but you know looking back, I began to realize that had I not been playing video games, I would have been a totally different person. I would have been a worse version of who I am today. You know what I mean? Like loneliness is bad enough already. Like it's already driving me mentally insane. You know what I mean? But video games is what saved me from like going full on crazy. Whenever I was alone, whenever I had no one, or if I ever get tempted to try to be someone that I was not, I would always tell myself that no matter what, I always had like a PlayStation to go home to. I always had a game system, and that is it really worth giving up my life for my life wasn't much, but is it really worth giving up my freedom of being able to play whatever video game that I wanted, all because of me trying to be someone that I'm not? And I've noticed this with other family members. My brother, who's a piece of shit, by the way. I'm never gonna like him, and I'm gonna use him for a lot of bad examples. But my brother, he, you know, he and I used to play video games, but he wasn't much of the video game type. He would play a few for a little bit, and then he'd go outside. And unfortunately, he would spend a little too much outside time, and that would have caused him to get into a lot of trouble. Most of it was with the police. A lot of it dealt with him being in court, and it was just a complete shithole. Unfortunately, my brother now is still paddling with a lot of stuff, and that's on him. That's his fault. He's not a good person. He's not. I'm not going to feel sympathetic, but I begin to realize that had video games not entered my life, I would have been just like similar to him, not just like him because he's a terrible human being. I told you that, but I could have been on a similar level to my brother. But at the same time, I also have to realize that I have to have a healthy mixture of both being indoors and outdoors, and luckily that is something that's being fixed over time. I've been going outside for walks, trying to lose weight. I've been eating healthier. I've been trying to take care of myself. But this video isn't about like self help or anything. This is just me talking about how video games essentially helped me to avoid a life that would have made me even worse. I could have been a much, much more horrible person had I not been, playing video games at such a young age. And it's weird to me how video games are demonized, how a lot of people try to make it seem like you're a horrible human being for playing games with violence and of all sorts. Meanwhile, there are kids out there who do drugs, they gang bang, they get into a lot of trouble and do all kinds of stupid shit. And I'm supposed to be the bad guy because I refuse to do any of that stuff. Like, what I mean? Like, if I'm a weirdo, right, for indulging in like geeky hobbies like video games and comic books and all kinds of shit, what does that make kids who drink underage, smoke underage, and do all kinds of shit? Horrible. That makes them like angels? Does that make them good people? So if I'm the horrible one for being geeky, what does that make people who do the exact opposite? And another question that I have now, look, I'm not underage anymore. I'm 20, but I'm just giving you an example of my mindset. when I was a lot younger, because I used to get bullied a lot, by people just because I wasn't doing the things they were. I would always, a lot of people would get hyped up about the release of like a live action TV show. I was more of an animated kid. A lot of people would hype up shoes and t-shirts and all kinds of clothing. I would just hype up whatever video game was out at the time. I was more invested in gaming events than I was invested in anything else. You know what I mean? Like while everybody was on YouTube trying to be like a vlogger, I was just trying to play video games. I didn't think about YouTube till way later. Everybody was always addicted to that one influencer just vlogging their entire lifestyle. Meanwhile, I would just be watching like tutorials on how to get specific weapons and doing trophies for PlayStation. But with all that being said, I don't regret any of it. You know, I'm glad that I escaped whatever life was about to put me in a chokehold for. You know what I mean? Like I'm glad that I avoided whatever other planned life had for me had video games not entered. And I've learned a lot from video games too. It's the reason why I'm so big into art. I remember there was a time in life where I had abandoned my art, my passion for art completely, because I don't know, like I just lost passion. All of a sudden I start playing Dead Space again, and art just clicks instantly. I never want to get off the game. I want to keep playing. I don't want to abandon this mentality that I had that I'm going to be one of the greatest human beings alive and inspire a lot of people. Had video games not entered my life, I would have completely thrown it all away. And I remember in high school I was mentally struggling a lot with a lot of things going on at home. Home was one of the worst places for me. I hated going home after school, but I also loved the fact that waiting for me was a PlayStation 4. I didn't have a PS5 at the time in high school, but I had a PS4 that still worked, and I wasn't playing any new games anyways. I was mainly playing a bunch of single players, but I was happy to know that I would arrive home and waiting for me was just a nice little controller, a headset, and a console with a nice little small 32-inch TV. It was the greatest feeling ever because it's like, man, like, is there anything more I could truly ask for? Is there something wrong with me just wanting to go home and play video games and not be bothered by anyone? Although it did get lonely at times, it was the video games that had saved me from fully going insane from the loneliness, you know. You know, but I am working on that. I am working on my social skills. I think it's important that as someone who plays video games, you work on your social skills as well. A lot of people don't like to socialize within the gaming space, especially today. A lot of people don't talk much in game chat anymore. They don't text. But I can definitely see that changing very soon, especially with the amount of things that gamers have been agreeing on lately. Sony and everything and discontinuing physical media. I think it's stupid, but who knows? Anyways, that's pretty much all I wanted to say was that video games saved me, and I'm glad that video games entered my life. I'm glad I wasn't one of those kids who would just deny that video games were some form of art. I'm glad that I never denied that video games weren't that important to people's lives. I'm glad that I embraced my geekiness for what it is. And I don't care what anybody says. I would rather continue to be a geek than to be a loser just ruining other lives just for fun when I can instead be embracing things that are not harmful. There's nothing wrong with playing video games or reading a comic book or doing anything that's like considered weird. If you want to collect toys, go ahead and do that. As long as your hobbies aren't hurting other people, then it doesn't matter. And I'm glad that that you were here to watch this video as well. And also, I recently turned 20 on the 28th of June. It would really mean a lot to me if by the end of this year you guys can help me get to 1,000 subscribers and maybe like this video. That's pretty much all I have. Thank you so much for watching, and you have a wonderful day. And tell me if video games ever saved you from your horrible experiences.